Good evening. Everyone who has heard me today deserves a big prize for putting up with me for so many times. But for me, it's a joy to be able to share with the people who I love dearly, and I know who love me as well, about these things that are so dear and near to my heart. Hospitality as gospel witness. Hospitality. We are bodies and souls, right? God made our bodies, He made our souls, and right now it's all mixed in. And the good news of the gospel is that God loves our bodies just as much as He loves our souls, and we are to love others, love their bodies and their souls. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about tonight. But first, let's start again with the story. Let's start with a theology of creation. God created the earth as a home for human beings in order that they might know Him and be in fellowship with Him. Have you ever thought about God as host or divine host of creation? God creates a space so that people can enter in and know Him and be known by Him. Often we shy away from hospitality and we invite people to restaurants because we don't want people to see our mess, right? People in Kansas are very hospitable. People in Colorado take a lot longer to invite you to their house. We are hospitable, but after we know you a lot better. Different kinds of cultures. Latin people will invite you to the house the day that they meet you. So it's different in different places. But God is the divine host, and His house that He built for us to know Him and to be known by Him is called creation. And He gave men and women a special charge, and that's to be co-hosts with Him, to be stewards of His creation. And we often don't think about creation as a place for meeting God or a place for encountering God and for encountering one another. One of the saddest things about our society, it's a good and bad thing, is I don't have to grow my own food. In fact, I have no plants that grow food at my house at the moment. Not even strawberries or tomatoes or basil or anything. I buy everything. I don't know where it comes from. I don't know who picks it. I don't know how it came about. I don't know how long it was on the vine or how long it was in the ground before I eat it. I'm alienated from the source of my food. My house is built out of bricks. I don't know who built them. I don't know when it was built. I don't know how they built it. I've never seen the pipes inside the walls. Our civilization is so advanced technologically and so blessed, you could say, that we aren't involved in every single process that affects us. But that means also that we only care about what concerns us. We only care about what we see. I don't care about bricklayers or their lives or their families if I don't see them laying bricks or I don't see them making bricks. I don't care about the farmers because I don't see them farming. And all I care is that I get a good price on the vegetables when I buy them a block and a half away from my house. But the biblical view of creation is that God created this place so we could find each other, so that we could take care of each other, and we could reflect God's image and His glory to each other, to creation, and back to God Himself. So we are called to be co-hosts with God. Well, sin messed up a lot of things, right? Because of sin, women had pain in childbirth. Men had to work even harder because work is not a consequence of sin. If we read carefully the Genesis account, there was work before sin, but it became arduous. It became difficult. So sin changed a lot of things in our world. But is this still our Father's world? Does it still belong to Him? And I would say that yes. This world does belong to God. This world is good. God said it was good. How many times? Definitely more than once. God saw it, and it was good. The original word in Greek, when it was translated from the Hebrew, means good and beautiful at the same time. God saw it, and it was good, and it was beautiful. We have a difficult relationship with the world, right? Today we see the world as something to be commoditized, something to be worked, something to be mined in order for us to live the best life we have. We don't have a caring relationship with creation. Because we often have this idea that somehow this world is not where we're meant to be. We're meant for another world, as C.S. Lewis said. But that's Plato. That's not Christian scripture. God created this world to be our home. We're told in 1 John 2, do not love the world or anything in the world. But then we're also told in John chapter 3 that God so loved the world. What do we do with that? How does God love the thing that we're not supposed to love? So we're called to love the world, called to love creation. We're called to love those who live in the world, but not love those things that come solely from the world, but those things that come from God. So often we misunderstand how we are to love the world. Psalm 24 says, the earth is Yahweh's and all that is in it, the world and those who live in it, for he has founded it on the seas and established it on the rivers. This world belongs to our Father. Evil has come and has tried to make us believe that this world belongs to him, that this world is ugly, that this world is evil. We don't have to go very far to see a sunset and remember that this world belongs to God. We have to see a new baby being born to realize that life is beautiful, that there are very beautiful things about our world because God continues to love our world and continues to redeem it. Jesus came to earth to set in motion God's plan to rescue his creation and redeem all the children of God. Like we talked about this morning, God is redeeming all of creation. Creation is pregnant with new creation. Now, why are we talking so much about creation if we're going to talk about hospitality? Because the first place we can be hospitable is in creation. Because God is hospitable to us. That doesn't necessarily mean that God gives us everything we want or desire to live in his creation. But it means he gives us the means by which we can encounter him and discover the good life that Christ offers us. As Christians, we are called to participate in the life of God and in what he is doing. We talked about this afternoon. We are called to be co-workers with Christ, fellow laborers in the gospel. We're called to participate in what he's doing and in his very life. And if God is redeeming creation and all those who call in his name, what are we called to do? But participate in the redemption of all creation. We have been called to participate in the redemption of all things. And hospitality, one way of looking at it, is a redemption of space and time, making space for an encounter with the Redeemer of all things. There's an old adage that says time is money, right? Have you heard it before? In Spanish, we say time is gold. El dinero es oro. But in English, time is money. Is that true? No, it's not true. Time is a gift. Time is not something to be spent. It is not a commodity. It is not something on the stock market. It is a gift from God, which is to be used to encounter him and to show grace to other people. So hospitality is redeeming time. It's spending time, if you wish. It's passing time with people. And it's creating a space in which God can be seen, in which God's will can be known, and his love can be felt with other people. You can go to a coffee shop and see different spaces, and see different couples, and see different groups, and see people talking about different things. That space can be sacred or it cannot be sacred. There could be conflicting interests. People could be wanting to get money out of someone. People can be trying to trick someone else for their own benefit. Or someone can be listening attentively and empathetically and compassionately, trying to show the love of Christ to that person. So hospitality is a redemption of space and time, making space and time for an encounter with the Redeemer of all things. What keeps us from creating space in order for others to encounter their Creator? And it's the big B word. Do you know what it is? We're busy. We are so busy, and we're proud of being busy. Latin Americans make fun of North Americans for being busy all the time. If you want to make fun of someone in Argentina, you say, "Oh, I know you're really busy." And what they're really saying is, you think you're really important, don't you? You think you're too good for me. You think you're too good to pay me a visit, to drink coffee with me. Being busy is a part of the American story of the good life. Good people are productive. Good people are wealthy. Good people are busy because to be wealthy and productive, you have to be busy. That's a story. I'm not buying it. Jesus woke up early to pray. He left needy people to pray. He went out of his way to talk to a Samaritan woman. He would not be so busy that he missed the calling of his life. Maybe a little bit of honesty would help unmask what's really going on. I'm working late so I can buy a better car that I don't need. I put my kids in all these sports because I'm living vicariously through them. Maybe I'm not as busy as I want to be, or maybe I'm busier than I want to be, but maybe God's just asking for some of my time for unexpected service. Maybe God's waiting to meet you in prayer, but you're busy. Maybe people need you, but you don't notice because you're busy, or they think you're busy. What keeps us from creating space in order for others to encounter their Creator? Often we are busy, but often we are fearful. Xenophobia comes from two Greek words, from xenos and phobia, which means a fear of strangers, right? A phobia of strangers or of foreigners, people who we do not know. It's not necessarily a racial thing or an ethnic thing, but we are afraid of the people that we do not know. And the exact opposite in the Bible is philoxenia, which means love for the stranger. What is the remedy for xenophobia, for fear of stranger? Love for the stranger. What's the opposite of love? Is it hate? Maybe it's indifference, right? I don't even care enough to hate them. I won't waste enough energy to even hate that person. Often we say, well, I don't fear people who look different than me. I don't fear people who think differently than me. I'm just indifferent. I won't spend time with them. I won't welcome them into my home. But the cure for fear is love. The cure for the fear of stranger is love for the stranger. It's hospitality. Christ calls us to love our neighbors. That's our gospel witness. We can say, I don't hate them. I'm not prejudiced. I'm not racist. I have friends who think this way or who look this way. Is that what Christians are called to do? Is that what Christians are called to say? They don't bother me. That's indifference. They're not disrupting my life in any way, so they can just do whatever they want with their life. Imagine if Christ dealt with us in that same way we often deal with other people. God's heart breaks for the world, but instead it doesn't say God so loves the world, but God tries not to look at the world because it makes him sad, so he's off doing other things at the moment. But no, Jesus came and dwelt among us. We have seen his glory, the one of the only begotten Son, and he is full of two things that our world needs: grace and truth. Jesus is full of grace and truth. Indifference is not love. It's not what we're called to. It's not the Christian vocation. There's hate, there's indifference, there's interest. I'm relatively interested in who these people are and what they have to say, and then there's love. It's so hard to go from indifference to love, if we're honest. It's hard. Is fear real? Is fear something we deal with? We live in a very fearful nation. Would you agree? This is my philosophy. This is my understanding. I could be wrong. We have a lot of guns. Who are we afraid of? What are we afraid of? We have a lot of locks, we have a lot of bars, we have a lot of alarm systems. We are very afraid. Fear is very real. How do you fight fear? In the gospel tradition, you fight it with love, not indifference, not in self-defense, not in retreat, but in loving one another. Rafael Aguirre, a Spanish theologian, wrote in his book on hospitality, taking in a stranger is not only helping them materially, but it implies the conviction that they have something to say to us, that we should listen to them and take their words seriously. We have something decisive, something divine to learn from strangers who are needy and knock at our door. In the ancient world, people always received foreign visitors in their tent or in their houses or in their palaces, because God usually came under the disguise of a stranger. That's what happened to Abraham, right? In Genesis 18, God came to him in the form of angels, but it said it was the Lord who was with him. If he had said, I'm sorry, I'm busy cooking, I'm sorry, I'm polishing my shoes, I can't attend to you right now, please come back later. Visiting hours are until 5 o'clock. He would have missed out on the good news that they had brought to give to him. Often we are comfortable treating people as charity cases as well, because that removes their dignity and makes us the haves and makes them the have-nots. What hospitality does is it changes the dynamics of power. It says, I'm not the person who has, I'm not the one who knows. I am in just as much need of Christ's grace as you are. Let's talk as equals. And it doesn't matter who paid for the food or what the excuse was. It matters that you're there together. Doing charity or doing service projects is easy because we're reinforcing a story that tells us we're better than everyone else. Often we come back from mission trips and say, I'm such a good person. I went and spent a week with poor people in Latin America. And then we're surprised that they're happy in their poverty. But the better story, the gospel story, says, they have something very important to tell me. I have something very important to learn from them. I need to listen to them. That person who begs on the corner can teach me a lot about life, about faith, about love, about hope. I have to learn from them. Let's talk a little bit about the early church, our source of inspiration. Tertullian wrote, one of the church fathers, citing a Roman governor that looked at the Christians, and this governor said, look how they love one another. And he began to cite all the different ways the Christians help each other out, despite race, despite class, despite ethnicity. The early church won the hearts of Jews and Gentiles with hospitality. There's a great book about how the early church grew so quickly in the first 3 or 4 centuries. And it always goes back to loving hospitality in one way or another. Look how they love one another. First century living conditions were terrible. We've talked a little bit about this afternoon if you were with us earlier. People often left their dead in the sewers, in the gutters of the streets, and eventually somebody would come by, pick them up, burn the bodies, and leave them outside the city walls. Christians were burying their own dead and burying the dead of those who were not Christians as well. Christians were taking care of the sick. They didn't know a lot about modern medicine. So often there would be a plague in the Roman Empire and everyone would leave. Parents would leave their children. Adults would leave their parents sick, and the Christians would come in to other people's houses, wash their wounds, and feed them and bring them back to health. And many Christians would die as well because of the plague. And then eventually the people would come back to their homes and see their family members alive and well. They would say, "What are you doing here? We thought you would die." Said, "You left me for dead, but these strange Christians came over, washed my wounds, and fed me and brought me back to health. And now I'm one of them." That happened time and time again. There was lack of food and clothing. We have found in archaeology that early Christian homes had food closets. They had closets for clothing, that they would store clothing and then give it out as they went meeting people who needed those clothes. Who in the Roman Empire would give away clothes? Most people only knew and dealt with people in their own social class. So if you're poor, all your friends are poor, there aren't enough clothes to go around. You don't give away your clothes. But in the early church, there were rich people. There was a middle class in the Roman Empire. There were rich people and there were poor people. And they shared goods, they shared food, they shared clothes. What's going on? Why are people doing these kinds of things? Like I said, plagues and pandemics. The early church didn't ask many theological questions about plagues. Did God send this plague? They didn't ask. We can read the stories of these plagues in Carthage and in Europe. They never asked, did God send it? Is God punishing us? They were very pragmatic about plagues and pandemics. What did the Christians do? They stayed and they nursed the sick back to health. What a great example for all of us. These are 3 books that talk about the rise of Christianity, the patient ferment of the early church. It wasn't easy to be a Christian in the first few centuries. They didn't have the freedoms that we do today, but they did so much through hospitality. And these 3 books really give witness to all the things that they did during those years. There were some threats to early Christianity as well. Things that were trying to get Christianity off its course. And one of those is what I call the Palestine First movement. These are the Judaizing teachers. People who said, well, to become a good Christian, you have to be circumcised. That was such a dangerous movement. Even the New Testament authors refuted these ideas. And it was a nationalistic movement. It was a confabulation of national pride and Christian theology. And Paul wasn't having it at all. Palestine First movement. There was also Roman nationalism. Well, if you're going to be a good Roman, you have to worship the emperor. You have to have divided loyalty. You can be Christian, but you must also be Roman. And in these small house churches in the first few centuries, they said, We would rather be good Christians and bad Romans than bad Christians and bad Romans. We choose to serve the kingdom of God. And many, when they became Christians, would leave military service. Many would leave government or join government in a different capacity. And they would say, our Christian calling impinges upon us. So Judaizing teachers, Palestine First Movement, the Roman nationalism, all these things were trying to end the early church. And what does Paul say? Christ's work on the cross reconciled what people thought could never be reconciled. And what is that? Two people groups. Who were they? Jews and Gentiles. Jews for so many years thought they were God's special people for themselves. And prophet after prophet after prophet were killed every time they tried to remind them they were to be God's holy people, to be a light to the nations. And their prophets were continuing to be murdered and murdered. Even John the Baptist in the prophetic tradition was murdered for calling to account those who were in power. So these two things were attempting to end Christianity, but Christians decided that if we're going to be Christian, it means we must put God first and God's kingdom first. Early Christians overcame fear of Jews or fear of Gentiles or fear of nationalisms with agape love. Agape is a word that existed before Christians, but the Christian agape love was so powerful that the Christian witness changed the semantics of the word agape. The word meant something else after Christians did it best. Agape had a different meaning from then on because of what they did, because of how they lived their love. There wasn't a good word to describe Christian love in the Greek when all this began, but they gave meaning to the word that later began to describe how they loved and lived with one another. What does agape love look like today in our fractured society? We also live in a culture gripped by fear, like I said earlier. We fear others who think and who look differently than ourselves. We fear violence and we fear death. A lot of the reactions against COVID and the pandemic really say more about our fear of death than our belief in science or public health. And it's a sticky issue. I don't want to talk about it, but it says a lot about how much we fear death or we fear missing out on the good life that we think we're having. So we are fearful people, but we're called to love. As Christ's love triumphed over fear and death, so too Christ's love in us can overcome fear. Have we ever looked at someone and said, I could never be that guy's friend. I could never be that girl's friend. And lo and behold, what happens? We become that person's friend. We never dreamed in a million years that we would become friends with that person because they had everything going against them. We didn't think like them. We didn't look like them. We didn't want to be their friend. We thought there was no value in their friendship. But God often surprises us. And as Christ's love triumphed over fear and death, so too Christ's love in us can overcome fear. We accept God or turn him away. We accept God or turn him away in the measure that we accept or turn away our needy neighbors. One of the things about Christianity that's hard is God says, if you want to be forgiven, you have to forgive. God doesn't give us a written exam, and I'm so glad. I have a fear of taking tests. When I teach, I don't give tests to my students. I hate tests. I hate grading tests. I hate taking tests. God does not give us a test, a written test, but he says, do you understand grace? Do you understand love? Do you understand reconciliation? Do you understand just how much I've done for you? Now let's see you do that same thing for other people. And that's the true test to know if we have really understood who God is and what God has done for us. But that's scary. Why is that scary? I don't know if I'm doing a good job of loving and forgiving other people like God has loved and forgiven me. But God is gracious, and He is living inside of us and working inside of us so that outside we can be the kind of people that we need to be. But we must accept God or turn Him away in the measure that we accept or turn away our needy neighbors. Hospitality can be intimidating. We can entertain people in our homes if we feel that we have a comfortable space or if we feel we have the resources to do so. But hospitality is hard because at the heart of hospitality is vulnerability. It's welcoming the other person into your space. In Argentina, if you want someone to be your friend, you invite them over at 8 for dinner and you start cooking at 8 p.m. when they get there. And you allow them to cook with you. It's hard to cook with some people. It's hard enough to cook for people, but it's hard to cook with people as well. So you invite them over at 8, you start cooking at 8, and then the true test of friendship is if you allow them to wash your dishes at your house, even the first time they come over. Will you let them touch your stuff? Will you give them a tour of your house? Not to say, look at my wonderful house, look how big it is. It's saying, do you trust me to get into your space? Do you trust me to show me who you are? To tell me what's most important to you? To show me your family pictures? To tell me who everyone is in those pictures? I want to see your library. I want to see what you read. I want to see what bothers you, what you're curious about, what you love, what you hate. I want to see you. I want to see where you live. If you don't want people to become your friends, you invite them over at 8, you eat at 8, you stay at the table, you serve dessert really quickly, and then you say you're really tired and you have to work tomorrow. And people get the message, and they thank you so much for the time you gave me today. But if you do hospitality right, it takes 3 to 4 to 5 hours per meal. And you get to talk about some things that are not always surface level because you can't talk about the weather for 5 hours. Some people could. I can't. Hospitality is vulnerability. But if we are sure of our story, if we know who we are, if we know who God is, if we know where creation is heading, if we know what our hope is, we can say, I'm a mess, being redeemed by God. I am a sinner who God has made holy, who God is sanctifying every day. And I'm kind of a mess, but God's working on it. God's fixing it. And if you're hurting, and if you're lonely, there's another seat at Jesus' table for you on Sunday as well. That's what hospitality is. We don't need dessert. We don't need fancy Italian coffee. I like it, but we don't need it. We do need sweet tea. I learned that today. We must have sweet tea, but we must be ourselves. We must be like Christ if hospitality is to work its magic among us. Thank you so much for putting up with me today, for listening so attentively. Thank you for supporting me. Thank you for helping me create spaces, sacred time and space in which people can encounter God. I'm looking forward to meeting with so many of you in the next 2 weeks and hearing about you, about your lives, about how you're striving to invite other people into God's story. So once again, thank you. And before we close tonight, we'll have a prayer.